There we go. Hello, everybody. It's Friday. It's the Gin and Tonic Show. It is 8 p.m. in the UK, and we are talking about Islam. Now, the way that this works is we always have a little welcome. So, welcome to the panel. Welcome, everybody. How's everybody at the end of this busy week?
Fine, thank you. I'm okay. Hello, everybody that's listening. Hello to those in the chat. Hello to those who are listening live, and hello to those who are listening to the recording that's been uploaded on YouTube.
Yeah, good evening. All well here, eating a nice dinner and ready for the show.
And I've just realized I once again forgot to go through the comments of last week. Ah. This is what happens when you have too much time because I was ready well in advance and then I thought, oh, everything's done, blah, blah, blah. So I was just doodling, writing on Facebook, and then I forgot to get to the comments of last week. So if there happens to be like another poem or another song, sorry, didn't get it. Okay, it's the Gin and Tonic Show. What we do is we give you an intro, telling everybody what we do, who we are, what we are not. Then we go to the news. Then we have a Quran block where we go through some sentences of the Quran. Then we have the theme of the month, which this month is slavery. And then we can still have some discussion points where we discuss videos or lectures or go through some quotes or whatever issues, live comments, things like that. And then finally, the hadith of the week. And if that is not enough Islam for you, you're always welcome to join us on the Discord server, and we'll give you the link at the end of the show. There's three ways of participating. One is the live show, where you can go either to Facebook or to the Gin and Tonic Show on YouTube, and you can talk to us via keyboard, or you can join us on the live show. If you want to comment, question, or criticize, welcome to do so. This is a very open show. Or you can just watch it afterwards. And like I did today, I will totally ignore your comments or questions or anything that you put on there. No, we normally try and do that. I'm guilty today of once again forgetting this. I don't know why. I used to be like religiously meticulous about this, and I've forgotten this. So, what we do is we focus on Islam because I, for one, I know more about Islam than I know about communism, for example, or whatever other thing you want to come up with. And one thing that we need to point out, we don't attack anything, okay? What we do is we critique, we look at Islam, we take the ideas, because an ideology is just that, it's just a collection of ideas. And we look at the ideas and we say, okay, what is a good idea? What is a not so good idea? And what is an outright bad idea? And this is what we try and bring to people. So if somebody does not know anything about Islam, then we will educate them. We will bring them examples. We will bring them stuff. If you are a Muslim already, we might be able to surprise you with some things because most Muslims have not read the Quran. So there you go. We try and use facts, reality, and reasoning. In other words, we don't go with emotions. We try and leave hadith out of this, and we try and concentrate on what the Quran says. What we condemn categorically is any kind of abuse, any kind of oppression, like slavery or violence, misogyny, anything like that. And we just try to be decent humans. All right, so don't go to Patreon or PayPal. Everything you get here is for free. Isn't that wonderful? That doesn't mean that the level is low. At least I hope it's not. And if you have any question, please let us know and we'll address it. Having said that, let's go to section number one. And that is, I never know whether Thunder you're talking or whether this is just some
No, I
feedback
think it's
from your
background.
microphone.
It's just feedback in the background. I think maybe a TV or something there.
No, I've turned it off.
Now, what we've done in the last two episodes is we've talked about something that, well, I think is horrible, is horrific, is terrible, is inhumane, literally, and that is slavery. And what we've found is that the words used in the Quran There's different words that are being used. We started looking at the word for slave, the abd, and then we went and went to look at the mamalakat aymanukum to see what this actually means, what the Arabic origin is, and how apologists today are distorting it. And this is something that brings me to something where we use words. And the funny thing is, where Christian apologists normally are experts at quoting other people. This is the main line of reasoning. In Islam, Islamic apologists are doing two things. One is that they're trying to change the words, the understanding, the contents of expressions in the Quran, and of course, they're also quoting others. But this is something that you don't see so much in Christians. They're trying to take the Bible and then say, well, what you see in the Bible doesn't actually mean what it says there. It's something completely else. They will come and say, well, you need some context, or here it says something else, but not to the extent that I've seen this Islamic apologists do. So what we have to do is we have to go and distinguish between words and expressions. Now, one thing I found fascinating is a sentence, when I drink beer, the beer is getting drunk. Now, to be drunk from beer is very obvious because when I drink beer, I get drunk. But now, if I drink the beer is getting drunk. So the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, how can the beer get drunk? But then, of course, drink, the past tense is drunk. So if it's then the genitive, so the beer is something that is being drunk, then it makes sense again. So you can play with words, and Klingon is the most particular. There you go. And this is the point. We have to learn to always define what it is that we are talking about. So I don't know why it is always the same thing that I have to go and look at the individual expressions in the Quran. Like, we're talking about slavery. And somebody said, well, there's no slavery in the Quran because the word slave is not in the Quran. All it says is free the slaves. Yeah, but hang on, if the word slave is not in the Quran, how can you free the slaves if the word slave is not in the Quran? So when it comes to freeing slaves, then any expression is valid. So in the Quran, you have like free a neck. This is something that Muslims will give you as evidence. They call this evidence that people were told to free the slaves. It says free a neck. But what do you mean free a neck? Why would I free a neck? I mean, in English, if I say I'm going for a ride, okay, I'm not literally saying I'm now getting on a horseback, going into the saddle and things like that. No, I'm taking her for a spin. Well, hang on, no, I'm not taking her for a spin. I'm not going to spin or something. No. I'm going to test my new ride. No, I'm not testing I'm trying out this baby. Okay, no, I'm sorry, I'm not trying out this baby. But you see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going from expression to expression to expression, which all mean the same thing. They all have the same contents, which is I'm getting into my car and just going for a brief spin or ride or whatever. And this is exactly the point. So if you say free a neck, it means that the people who were transported with wooden bars around their necks, this is why they're called necks, because they were taken by the neck, transported, and then sold as slaves. So if you free a neck, you are taking off the shackles, you are taking off this wooden bar that is keeping you tied down, connected to all the other guys who are being transported as slaves. So funny enough, freeing a neck is being totally acceptable for a Muslim, and the other words, if it says take a neck, then they will say, no, that's not talking about slaves. So then it's very inconsistent, it's highly hypocritical, and it shows that most Muslims are better than their God. It's just that they're too afraid to admit it. Okay, let's go through a couple of items in the news. The Pakistani mosques are open for business. And last week, I don't know if you remember, we talked about this Tablighi Jamaat event in India. And this was the biggest coronavirus spike in India at this, for the last couple of weeks. Now, the same happened in Malaysia, where it seems Muslims are simply, I don't know, their trust in their God and the ancient superstitions are simply too big. Because remember, there's lots of sentences in the Quran which, if you draw them on your shirt, or if you recite them, or if you do X, then you are safe from anything that will harm you. If you eat just a little bit of this seed, or if you eat a little bit of this date, then it's not going to affect you in any way. And funny enough, the Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem remains closed. Medina, Mecca remain closed. But Muslims in other countries, in Malaysia and in Pakistan, don't have this constraint, this reasoning. They will go and they will pray because they feel that they need to do it. For them, praying to their God is more important than killing others. They will not take the responsibility and stay at home. No, they will go, and they don't care that they might just be killing other people. Now, it's very difficult for some people, especially older people, to understand that they can't go everywhere at the moment. They can't go and visit. They can't do the things they're normally used to doing. So it's quite tough. I understand that. But come on, these are young people. They should understand that there are things which their God simply cannot regulate, and this virus is just one of those things. So, weird. Okay,
I think
then
it's just ignorance, right? Isn't it?
it is, isn't it?
Ignorance
But
of the
it's
science, but also
willful.
ignorance of how the consequences of their actions, right? And again, these are
Yeah.
people that apparently, appeal to the Quran in some subjective, wishy-washy way, right? So it certainly doesn't make people better, that's for sure. So this whole
Yeah.
thing of objective morality is,
The thing is that when you're brought up in an ideology that teaches a fly, if it lands on your food, under one wing is the disease, under the other wing is the cure, and if you eat 7 as you want to eat, it will protect you, and evil eye and black magic and the will of Allah, and I say this or repeat this sort of like every other show now, where when Muhammad went to war in one situation, some people stayed behind, and Muhammad said to us as well, whether you stay behind or you go, either way you will have died if it was Allah's will for you to die, whether you stayed at home or whether you went to the war. So with that kind of mentality, what exactly are you expecting the followers of Islam to do? Are they going to put the words of men ahead of the words of their God when they bear testimony that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger? They have to take these things seriously, because to not take them seriously will be to challenge the authority and authenticity of these texts. That's the implication. So they have to do what they've got to do, what they believe is right, by following their ideology.
and I think
understand that,
more
but
of
in
them are
this case,
starting
we
to.
have real evidence. We have real facts of people dying. It's not just the word. We have the real world, which
Yeah.
is showing them it's the opposite.
Yeah, you're right. But they will just tell us, yeah, but that was because it was Allah's will. That's the whole point of that text I'm bringing out about when they went to war. If you just stayed behind, or if you went to the war, if you stayed behind at home, it doesn't matter. If it was your day to die, it was your today, either at home or at the war. It would have been better for you to come than to stay at home. So in the same sense, if you follow the logic through, these people were meant to die anyway in accordance with the Islamic ideology. It doesn't
But
matter
the
what.
people who died, the people who stayed at home didn't die. It's only the people who went to the mosque.
Yeah, but no, it was the ones that went to war. Remember, because we're talking about the booty and arguing
Oh,
about
okay.
the booty.
I'm taking now today. Yeah.
But they're going. But we're following the Quran. So if you're a Quranist, and I don't know if it was late chapter 2 or early chapter 3 where this situation came up. So if you follow the logic through from the Quranic point of view, everything is predetermined by Allah right from the moment of conception. What kind of life you have, how you're going to live. So these things are already instilled in the mind of a Muslim. So coronavirus, whether you die from it or not, it is irrelevant as to whether the science and the dispersion of the disease, how it's spreading. These things are irrelevant to a Muslim. The things that are relevant to the Muslim is it Allah's will or not? There's the point. So we had this discussion last week about the mindset of a Muslim with coronavirus. So as barbaric and as stupid as insensitive as their behavior is in these instances, they are following the will of their God. They are following what Islam teaches. So, if anything, that's Islam in action. There you see. What you see is what you get. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's definitely
Rob?
some like that. Yeah, yeah, definitely some like that. There's a few that are trying to think. Obviously, that puts them at odds with their book,
There's the
but
point.
they again can find ways to circumvent that.
Right,
I
but
just heard it recently today. Right, a Muslim was saying we've got a subjective view of morality. I'm like, really? Okay,
But
interesting.
you've just said it there. Then you've just agreed with me on that point that they're going against their book. So that's the whole point. So when we're standing there or sitting there or reading articles and we get frustrated about the stupidity of the behavior, we have to recollect, but this is the mindset that Allah and Muhammad have put inside the mind of a Muslim. This is the way to think and this is the way to behave. And we just have to accept that if you want Islam to be on this planet, this is what goes with it. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, another item I found is that just a few months after this clown in the White House in the US declared victory over IS or ISIS or ISIL or whatever, Daesh, the quote I found is that they are now finding fertile ground in which to rejuvenate due to a number of factors, including government mishandling of a protest movement, as well as the ongoing conflict between Iran and the US. So it seems that IS, while they have been beaten down, it's like a fire that is still glowing. So it's still there, and they're still managing to find, and this goes exactly in your direction, Thunder. They are finding idiots who are so convinced that the words in the Quran are true that they will go and blindly follow what is absolutely ludicrous. I don't understand why they think that just using violence, just having a small team, a small group of people running around, killing everything, destroying everything, is making any kind of impact on the rest of the world. I don't know. And it is exactly what you are talking about, is that they will just blindly follow this because they are convinced their book is correct. And this is so funny. That's not funny, it's actually quite sad.
I'm not promoting any channel here, okay, but and I'm certainly do not subscribe to their brand Christianity. However, on Sira International, one of the Christian channels with Al Fadi on, he's interviewing a guy at the moment, and he's one of those statistic types of guys. Maybe you've watched him yourself, guys, where he breaks things down numerically, like the percentage of this and the percentage of that. And he was going through the Hadith, and he was saying something like 25% of the Hadith is about the promotion of Islam violently. Now, and it's like when you're going through the Quran, 1/4 of the Quran is, Allah's threat of hell. When you've got that continuously going over in your mind like a beating drum, what are you expecting to get from the followers? If that's the repeated pattern, every fourth verse is either you're going to go to hell, or every fourth hadith is kill the non-Muslim, we have to establish a caliphate and take over the world. Islam is the only one that's going to be accepted by Allah, and if you don't accept it, you're going to go to hell. What kind of attitude and mentality is that going to breed? What are you hoping to achieve with that kind of mindset? This is a very Borg-like mentality. I often think that the writer of Star Trek, when he was looking for inspiration to write about a scientific opposition to, or a creature in opposition to the Starfleet, he must have looked at Islam and thought, that's what I'm going to base the Borg on. Identically, when you look at the Borg, you look at Islam, the mentality, the attitude, the hive mentality, if you like, and you will be assimilated. Death is futile, resistance is futile, death is irrelevant. We'll furnish your technology for our needs, so to speak. That's what you get when you visually see Islam. So there you go. And the manifesto is in the Hadith and in the Quran as well. So what you're talking about there, you're just watching what Muhammad was doing in the 7th century. Just better technology. They just kill people faster now.
Got a question. Is the highway code moral? Yes, it is. The highway code tells you don't drive in the passing lane, keep everything safe, keep calm. Yeah, very moral because it increases the well-being of everybody.
No, no, well, I wouldn't say the highway code is moral. I would say it's legal and it's orderly. That's all. It's order. You stop, you go. You drive this side, you drive that side. Um, I wouldn't say there's any sense of morality in that. I would say it's orderly and legal.
Well, this is why what I do is I bring together morality. Well, morality for me is a man-made construct.
Yeah.
Morality does not exist as such. Okay,
No,
so
absolutely.
for me, morality is just something. It's up to you how you define it. And for me, the definition of morality is actually what increases the well-being of humanity. That is for me. That is morality. That is this. Okay, the last item. Or actually, Rob, do you have a different idea of what morality can be?
No, I agree with you. I speak a lot about it, particularly on other channels. For me, it is about the well-being of conscious creatures. That's the, if you wish to call it, and I'm sort of getting away from whether it's objective or subjective. That just gets into a minefield with most people. So
Yes.
That's the starting point, and then my methodology is reason, science, and empathy. And I use those in combination. And once you have a starting point, then you can say something is objective. And what I mean by objective, from a starting point, forget whether the starting point is objective or subjective, because that, like I say, what I mean by that is it's no longer subject to a person's opinion. If we are talking about well-being and we, for example, come to the conclusion that wearing a veil outdoors is worse for women. What do we mean by worse? It degrades well-being, less vitamin D, whatever the scenario is, right? It doesn't matter if the woman comes along and says, hey, but I think it's the best thing since sliced cheese. She is objectively wrong by those methodology using well-being as our benchmark. That's what it means to be objective in my world. Forget about the starting point, right? Because we've got this fellow Catch-22. He's all over the show as well. Bless him. He's confused. I've explained this multiple times, but it's surprising because Sabur was also confused with this, with the young fella from Cosmic Skeptic. He was also confused that you can have, let's just say, a starting point and then have an objective follow on from that. That this was just too confusing for most people. And I've been through this, right, with people, and it just seems, and it's philosophically pretty sound in the sense that it's understandable. People can still challenge it, of course. Nothing in philosophy is like a knockdown argument, but I think it's pretty solid and it's flexible. And that's something that Islam does not have, or at least not if you're going to follow the book closely.
And I, on the other hand, believe in the Bible. So my morality is objective. Just for
I mean, we could talk about that at some point because it depends what you mean by objective, and then we'd go into whether what that's all about, because there's more than one way one can say objective, and then whether it's because if you had something that was objective, let's say that we agreed in this case with Islam, let's say for example that we agreed that Islam had an objective moral basis, then the question becomes, is it objectively good or objectively bad? How do we determine that? And if the only way to determine that is by whatever God says, then it is arbitrary, and that I wouldn't call objective. By arbitrary, I mean whatever God says. Well, how do we know what God says in Islam, or Allah in this case, is good? Well, because God says so. Well, that's circular and trivial, but that all that really means is might makes right. How do we actually know that it's good? What is it that we can measure it by? We can't measure it by God's word, because then we're giving up any sense of objectivity in the true sense of the word. We're just saying, hey, because he's more powerful, and he created Muslims and everybody else apparently, that makes it good. Well, no, that doesn't work that way. So they would need something else to say it's objective. And if all they mean by it is, well, it's outside of human opinion or any humans, well, I don't accept that, because like I say, if it's arbitrary, then in what sense is it objective? Objective means that it couldn't be any other way, i.e. that it must be the case. And him just saying that it must be the case isn't objective for me. So somebody would need something else if they're a Muslim to come along and tell me why it's objective. Exactly. But I will leave it to Catch-22 here, who's often in the comments, to tell me how it's objective, if in fact it's arbitrary, and the only way we can know is because God says so. So I'll leave that for Catch-22 to wrestle with.
Is that Muhammad Catch-22?
No. It's some other fella that's floats around on different hangouts.
And the animator made exactly the point that I was making with the highway code. I mean, so your answer is unquestioned, because this is exactly this. It could be immoral if you're going through a red light. because you could be endangering and harming somebody physically. So there you go.
Right then, moving forward then.
Ramadan. It's only a week away. Now, the funny thing is, I spent an hour, and I'm not exaggerating here. I spent an hour trying to establish when Ramadan actually starts and ends. Now, likely, it's going to start next Thursday on the 23rd of April, but it could be Friday the 24th. And it will probably end in the evening sometime of around the 22nd of May or the 23rd. We don't really know. What we do know is that the final evening of Ramadan, and this is information again, factual information, this is the consumer-oriented part of the Gin and Tonic Show. The end and the final evening of Ramadan consists of a celebration called Eid al-Fitr, when the traditional month-long fast is ended with a feast. Now, why I had such a problem establishing the beginning of Ramadan and the end is because we have Muslims in Indonesia, India, and in the Middle East. Those are the three high areas. But the only way that you officially establish Ramadan is in Mecca. But now, even in Saudi, they are at odds because they don't know, should it be Mecca or should it be Riyadh? Because the time that you will see the moon will differ between Riyadh and Mecca, because we are not on a flat piece of slab or something. We are on a globe. And this is something that the people who wrote the Quran did not know and were not aware of. And this is why we have all these huge problems, because for a Muslim in Indonesia, the moon is not yet up. But then a few hours later, it can be sighted in Saudi Arabia. So, and let's say in Mecca. So then in Mecca, when the guy up on the minaret, he sees spots or whatever. I don't know whether they're allowed to use binoculars or whether they're only allowed to use their naked eyes. So if he spots the moon, he screams, "The moon, the moon, the moon," beginning of Ramadan. Yeah, but hang on, that's already the beginning of the day in Indonesia. It's been and gone. So they have to wait a full day before they can start their Ramadan. So Ramadan is different in different parts of the world. So the only place where you can go is go to Saudi Arabia. So KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, determines when the rest of the world is going into Ramadan. But they don't even know themselves what to take and how to establish this. So there are so many conflicting views now. And then a lunar cycle is 4 weeks. But they're saying, well, now if it starts on the 23rd of April, it should end on the 23rd of May. But that is not the same thing as saying this is exactly a lunar calendar, because then you're adding 2 days. So it's really difficult and complicated if you take a lunar calendar and the vague sort of commands and parameters that you get in the books, in the Quran. It's not specified, and it doesn't take into consideration what we know today, because of course today we could very easily, for every point on earth, we can establish when the moon will be visible, but we're not allowed to do that. No, they still send somebody up on the minarets, and there's different places in the kingdom where they send people, like to the border of UAE or places like that, so that they can then go and radio back, yep, we've just seen the moon. Is Faye coming back at some point? Well, she's doing her own show at the moment. So I don't think that we're going to see her today. I don't know why she's doing her own show today. I have no idea. Okay, any comments on Ramadan?
I think
Yeah, like you say, it's all. Go on,
Sorry.
Bruce.
No, I was going to say, I was just going to respond to is Faye coming back. Faye's doing a lot of things on other channels as well. She recently appeared on Abdul Samir's channel. She's been on RT, the Russian news channel. So I think she's getting a lot of exposure that is drawing a lot of attention from other channels that are dealing with Islam or say that are, if you like, doing polemics against Islam. She's getting a lot of attention, and obviously very much sought after. Being a woman as well as an ex-Muslim, and I can't think of any other woman that's out there as an ex-Muslim that's proactive. So it's,
Mimsy is.
Sorry?
Mimsy is.
Oh, that's two. I don't know of many. They're the only two I know. So, yeah.
Well, no. There's plenty actually, because I can immediately think we had three on the show, like Mina Dada Boy, for example. She was on the show a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I'm on about sort of like, I mean, and I know there's the Somalian lady. I forget what her name is. I think, and there's another one on CEMB. But what I'm saying is, at this moment in time, Faye's the spotlight seems to be on Faye.
Oh,
For
okay.
So she's drawing a lot. They've kind of like gone into the background a little bit, but Faye's become a little bit more prominent, so to speak.
Yeah, I
So,
think it's like a lunar calendar.
yeah.
Like it's for wane and wax and.
I was going to say
Okay.
with the what do you call it, with Ramadan, as you say, it's a little bit hit and miss, right? They'll make it sound like it's accurate, but again, somebody calling out the moon and all that sort of stuff, and also for how this works around the world, and that in the countries where the sun doesn't set, or on the space station, or when we eventually get to the moon, again, that sort of stuff. Presumably Allah didn't think that far. Well, then again, at that stage, they didn't think that there was anything outside the dome, right? So
Yeah.
what can you expect?
Assuming Allah doesn't split the moon again when they get there,
or put it back again in such a way that you can't tell it's been split, right? The perfect magic trick.
that nobody saw.
Yeah.
But
No,
we'll be
they
coming
claim
to
that
in
there's
due
a guy
course.
in India who actually wrote this down, and somebody did write this down pretending that they were a guy in India. And actually, I traced it all the way to the British Museum. It actually, and it really physically in reality exists.
A bit like the 1953 report in the Manchester Times about they found a piece of wood with Muhammad's name on it, and it came from Noah's Ark.
And the Ark, yeah.
And then also Neil Armstrong, he became a Muslim because he heard the Adhan while standing on the moon, and Jacques Cousteau became a Muslim because he heard the Adhan while he was deep sea diving. Yeah.
Okay, we come to the next segment, which is the Quran. We are still in chapter 3, but now this is the last part of chapter 3. And last time, or 2 weeks ago, I said that there's 179 sentences in the Quran, I think. I apologize profusely. I don't know what happened to me. I really didn't. I don't know. I had a block. So I said 179. I don't know why.
You mean in this chapter or the entire Quran?
No, in this chapter number 4. I mean, I know this chapter 4 by heart so well. It's absolutely amazing. Why I suddenly had this block and I said 179. I don't know where I got this 179 from. Really, I have no idea.
286, is it? I think.
Sorry?
286, I think, isn't it? Let's just check. 286.
No, that's 2.
Oh, sorry, that's 2. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, chapter 4. We were talking about the Jews, we were talking about Christians, we were talking about reward and punishment, the carrot and the stick, and things that people shouldn't do and what they should do. And this continues in sentence number 163. And there you get just a list of names. If I remember correctly, because I did this like a week ago, because it was Easter and I had time, and I sat down and I did this. I think this is a list of prophets where the funny thing is, now in the Quran you have the mistake, okay? What the people thought is that the Old Testament was given to Moses, all right? Which is not true. I mean, this is just Moses only has this print out of the 5 books, all right? It's not the complete Old Testament. Then they said that the Injil, the Gospels, are given to Jesus, but they're not. Because other people are talking about Jesus. Okay, it's not Jesus himself writing something. So it's not that God came to Jesus and says, here, this is the New Testament, please write it down, the way that it's said to have happened with Muhammad. But it's very different. But the authors didn't understand that. So in the Quran, they say that the Gospels were given to Jesus. They were not. And the same thing here, because they're saying that the Psalms were given to David, but they were not. Maybe 1 or 2, but definitely not all of them.
Yeah, there's something like 146 Psalms. And as somebody who follows the Bible, not all of them were written by David, no. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. So this is another
But that's
mistake that they make because they don't really know the history of the Bible.
Can I just add on there as well? There's a name in there, and it's quite important that you observe that. And there's a particular reason, because it's calling him a prophet, but nobody recognizes him as a prophet. And there's something else about these names as well.
Which one is that?
Ishmael. He's the
He
bastard.
is not a prophet?
He's not.
I
No,
thought in Islam he's recognized as a prophet.
no, he's not. By who? How? He was sent away by Abraham, and
Yeah,
that's
but
the
he's
last.
the oldest Muslim.
No, this is in Islamic parts. First of all, what I'm trying to say is they have to get Ishmael in there because they're going to claim lineage from Ishmael.
Exactly. That's my point. Yeah.
There is no evidence to support that. It is just
Okay.
claim, right? Jews never saw him as a prophet, but they have to get him in there because they can't claim anybody else that any lineage from. So they have to claim lineage from somebody that is mentioned, but is mentioned in history for a moment, and then you don't hear anything from them again, and they'll try and claim descendancy from that, and that's where Ishmael comes into the line. And second of all, 123,999 prophets. That's
Plus
what
one.
plus one. But we only find the ones in the Bible written. Yet, why are we not finding names of other prophets that went to other lands? Why is it the same names all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the funny thing is,
sorry. The
no,
point I'm trying
I
to
just remember.
Go on.
Carry on. No, you carry on. I'm going to shut up now. You carry on.
What I'm saying is, well, for there to be some consistency with that hadith, what is the name of those prophets that went to India, for instance? And we talked about this last week, Scott. When you consider 123,999 prophets, when you look at it from generation to generation to generation, using the Islamic genealogy, you have 2,883 prophets at any one given time on planet Earth, from Adam all the way down to Muhammad. If you look at it, consecutively, that is to say, one after the other, then you have human beings on planet Earth for 4.5 million years. You would think in all that time, other than the names of the ones in the Bible, you would have other names of other prophets that went to other lands, like for Africa, South America, for China, for India, for the Russian Caucasus, but you don't. This, for me, is a problem.
Well, I mean, there's a sentence in the Quran in 14:4, which says that a prophet was sent to every nation to transmit the good news in their language. We don't know what their language now means, if it's the host's language or the prophet language. But then there must have been a prophet in Iceland or in Australia, but we don't see this mentioned anywhere, and we don't see any references or any kind of evidence for there having been anyone from Mecca in Iceland. So what's the point?
Or of a book, or of a message. So we don't find the names of these prophets, we don't find any books that they're written, and we don't find any message that was left behind. And thinking clearly is just asking the question there: did the prophets get progressively shorter from 90 foot to tall Adam? Yes, I did do an article on that on the show a couple of years ago with reference to 90 foot Adam, and I'm hoping that in the future Stops is going to allow me to do that same article again, but maybe with a bit of a fresher, newer information that can relate to it, to expand on it a little bit. But yes, according to because the Muslims will have you believe that Adam was only 90 foot tall in heaven. But however, when you look at the Hadith says something very interesting at the end, and they have been decreasing ever since. Decreasing is an incremental reduction in size. And I did a little bit of investigation on this using the principle that Stops brought to my attention, and that is, if Adam was 90 foot tall and you use the genealogy as you find in many halal shops when you go get your half pound of meat from the halal shop, you'll find that there's about, I think, 10 generations between Adam and Abraham, which means that if you give it a 5 foot reduction rate per generation, Abraham would have been 40 foot tall.
Well, what I was going to say is, if you go and you learn Islam in the Middle East, what they have everywhere is they have huge placards where they actually show these lineage lines, and they start then with Ishmael, and they go through a couple of names, and all of a sudden they end up with Muhammad. Jesus is in there as well, and it's quite amazing how their little world, this little bubble, is put together, and how you have a linking of all these different, what I call fairy tales, how they all interact with one another, and how they are then linked by the names which, like you pointed out, we've never even heard, or which don't even make any sense. Like all the names that you find in this one sentence of the Quran. This is just it's stupid. What is the point? What is the guidance in giving you a list of names without telling you what the reason is for giving you this?
I think the interesting thing is, though, Stops, is he has to go by names that he knows. He can't introduce anything new, otherwise he gets found out. And one of the greatest examples, which that the Quran gets found out time and again, is when it tries to mention something that secular history should be able to report on and confirm. And there's a vacuum in secular history as to try and find this person or this
No, that
location.
doesn't work. Exactly.
And the greatest example is Dul Qurnain, which we would,
Your favorite.
my favorite, that is my garlic to a vampire. Yeah,
164, just more showing off, and God speaking to Moses, speaking to a person directly. Now, there's a contradiction because in the Bible it's the same contradiction, where you can see God and you cannot see God. So they're a little bit confused by this. But apparently in the Quran it says that God spoke to Moses directly. Then 165, which I think we've just been. If anybody wants to, jump in, say something, just jump in and go. So we're just going to go. Everyone had a messenger. Well, we just discussed this. No, not everyone had. So there's no excuse. Well, hang on. If people don't tell you anything about the Islamic God, you cannot be judged by whoever is going to come back and judge you. So rather shutting up and not telling people about this is a much better way than telling them so that they have to reject it, and then by their logic you're going to get punished for that. So if people don't know, there's no excuse. So isn't it better just to shut up?
Yeah, I've said that to Muslims before as well, right? If people don't know and there's a possibility they could go to heaven without getting dawah, and you give them dawah and they hear what nonsense you speak and then reject it, right? You've actually assisted them in going to hell.
Oh, I love the creativity of people. And this one isn't interesting because if you go and investigate, I mean, we can do a show on this one as well, because there's a whole evolution around this word, how you get from Jesus to Isa. And the most, convincing one that I found is it's actually a mistake. It's a misunderstanding how they came to the word Isa. But anyway, that's a different story. So we have showing off, God speaking, everybody had a messenger. That's not true. No excuse, unfortunately. Then we have in 166, God, both. Okay, it's God and the angels. They both say the Quran is true. So you can't argue with that, can you? I mean, if God and the angels.
Yeah, it says they bear witness, right? And the angels bear witness. So they're just like, what do you call it? Spectators, right?
Yeah, but they nod.
But it says the angels bear witness, but enough.
Yeah, but so does God.
But Allah isn't a for a witness. Well, if we only need Allah as a witness, why bother mentioning the angels as a witness?
Exactly. So what is the point?
But it's a trivial point as well, right? Because if you're making a command, you're bearing witness to your own command, unless you're doing it when you're unconscious or something like that, or you're mad.
Unless there is another God involved. Remember, it's only in the name of a God. And remember that this God, Allah, prays for Muhammad to another God. And there's a lot of instances in the Quran where this God speaks about another God, about another Allah. So if you have that, then it suddenly makes sense that the people fell out of their role because they were in the role of being God, but then they forgot about that and they were now people, and now they were speaking about a God again, and then it makes sense again.
And also it's interesting. The other point I want to bring up about this verse as well is, well, is the Quran created or not in heaven? Did it always exist, or did Allah
Yeah,
speak?
this is
Because if you say it says there, His own knowledge. Well, if the Quran is already was in existence and is permanently in existence and was uncreated, then how could it be from Allah's knowledge? Because Allah's knowledge will have had to have created it. But if it's always been in existence, then this is not Allah's knowledge.
or the other way around. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. This is a different, difficult topic logically. I mean, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it'll get abrogated. Sorry, it'll get abrogated.
167. Non-believers are off track. I don't know. Do you want to read the original, because this is just
Those who
my
fear faith and keep off, quote, men from the way of Allah have verily strayed far, far away from the path. Indeed, those who disbelieve and avert people from the way of Allah have certainly gone far astray.
Basically, if you reject faith and you pull somebody else on your road, then you've really gone on the wrong side of the road.
This is why I said they're off track. So, 168. God will not forgive them. This is Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, as is testified in 1:1. Okay, so the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, will not forgive. Excuse me.
There's two things there as well. Huh? That's right. So they reject faith and do wrong, whatever wrong is.
And then Allah forgives all sins. Well, no, he doesn't. Indeed, it is He who is the forgiving, the merciful. Again, in 39:53, same thing. But here, Allah will not forgive them. But Allah forgives all sins. So which is it? Strange.
Is that 168? Stops?
Sorry? This is 168.
Those who reject faith and do wrong, Allah will not forgive them nor guide them to any way. So you're saying that He also forgives them, is it?
Well, in 39:53, it says
Oh,
Allah
sorry,
forgives
another
all
verse.
sins.
Gotcha. Sorry. Yeah. So there's a contradiction there, yeah. But presumably we're just not reading it in the right context, right? We're speaking to different people at different times and some other excuse comes up, right? Not clear there. If it was clear and he said he was speaking to the Arabs in, straight after in Medina, for example, then we'd be clear, right? He's speaking to those guys. And prior to that, he might have been speaking to the Arabs in Mecca, or he might be speaking to other people at some other time. And of course, all of this is just like way general, what's called in psychology, chunked up. In other words, it's very vague, nebulous responses where what we're looking for is specificity and we get generality.
And the thing is, I'm not doing this for every sentence. This is just something that I happen to remember. So I can't remember. Like here, they will go to hell forever. There's a contradiction. I remember there's a contradiction, but I can't remember where. Because they're not going to go to hell forever. But in 169, this is what it says. But what the hell? 170, I mean, this is so pathetic. Because in 170, this God says, please, pretty please, believe me. No, believe Muhammad, or else. We don't really know who is supposed to be believed here, but the or else is very clear. Yeah.
But the thing is,
170.
but this for me is another verse that confirms you have to go with the hadith. How can you believe in Muhammad unless you're using the hadith as well?
Yeah, you can't. Because there's no information here.
There's the
Let's
point.
just see.
So Quranists only are not actually following the Quran then, are they?
No,
So
they're not. They can't.
Quranist. So they're not a Quranist is by implication not a Quranist if they're not following what the Quran says.
Well, you see, this is the difference. The Quranists, they will do is they will rewrite the entire Quran to make it fit their thinking. It's what's it called? Pro hoc, after hoc. I forgot the name.
Post hoc or ad hoc.
Post hoc. There you go. Thank you. What they try and do is they say, you see, if you take this, then it makes sense. So it must be this. So, it's a circular thing.
So it's post hoc ad hoc. Post hoc.
No, different.
It was post hoc. It is post. So I'm getting a bit tongue tied. So Quranists are basically post hoc of a product that was ad hoc.
Yeah, you could say that.
No,
That's even more confusing.
what they're doing is you're seeing a sentence which says something about whatever, and then what they are doing is they're changing that and saying, you see, once it has been changed, it now supports our view.
Oh, that's the miracle of what's that? That's the miracle of rhetorical devices, where one word can have 4 to 10 meanings, and you can infer what you need to infer depending on which location of planet Earth you're in. If you're living in a Western democracy where you've got freedom of speech and you're a Muslim, so the law is on your side, you can infer what you need to infer. But living in Indonesia or Saudi Arabia, you have to go with the Sharia of that country. Stupid me, sorry, Stops. I forgot.
171. Christians, don't be such Christians. Come on. Jesus was just another guy. And don't say 3. Oh, shit, you just said 3. Go straight to hell. That's it. I mean, how stupid is this? Don't say 3. I mean, how can you put into a book, don't say 3? There's only one God. There's no kids. And this is one God who owns everything. Now, what kind of a sentence is this?
Well, I will look at it from a historical point of view and think, well, hang on a minute here, because the Trinity you've got here is Mary, Jesus, and God.
Yeah, Mother, Father, Son. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I say this is a historical lie, because I've never come across this. I'm not a Trinitarian myself, but I have studied into it, looked into obviously for obvious reasons, and I've never come across a Trinity that involves Mary. The closest I've come to any Mary kind of worship is with Catholicism, where they treat her as the mother of God. Yeah. I've never come across anything where Mary is a part of triune.
But this is a clear verse, right, as to why they're so Unitarian based, right? This is pretty clear in that sense.
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, when they're arguing with, say, Christians, the first default they have, it's like when I'm commenting, when I'm trying to rattle a hornet's nest on, say, Adnan Rashid's channel, when I'm bored, the first response is, yeah, but you believe in the Trinity. And I'm like, no, I don't. But that's your default, because you've gone to a verse like this and you don't even understand which Trinity you're arguing against. Because the Trinity of Christendom is the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and God. Whereas the Trinity that Muhammad's talking about is God, Jesus, and Mary. So even the Trinity you're arguing against is wrong. And interestingly enough, Stops, isn't it your sister or your sister-in-law that's a Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah.
Well, Muslims, right? All you Muslims that are listening out there, here's an interesting point. Every time I argue with a Muslim, they come out with the same defaults. Probably got it from Ahmadiyya, which is 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. Right? You got that from a 1953 tract published and printed and distributed by Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh,
so
really?
Please, yes, you can ask your sister this. I've got the name of the tract. Trinity, divine mystery or pagan myth. That's the name of the tract. Probably printed in 1953. So the arguments they use are not even their own arguments. Everything that they do is a plagiarism of something that somebody else has done. So please, enough of that tract already. That was for your sister, Stops.
Anyway, they're going on with Jesus because Jesus would accept God, and those who don't, they will get a talking to. And 73, those who do. In other words, those who don't, okay, this is the same. This is the funny thing with the Quran. So Jesus would accept God, and those who don't get an F-, and those who do will be rewarded. They get an A+, and those who don't will be tortured. So if you take these two sentences, this is flip-flopping all the time. You don't know who the hell is getting what for what in the end. This is quite funny.
And the thing is, Allah says he can do anything, being is. He can do whatever he likes. There's nothing that Allah can't do. But it says here he can't have a son. So if you can't have a son, you can't do everything then.
Yeah.
Well, presumably they would say that he chose not to have a son.
But he can't do everything.
No. He can't have without a mate.
He can't have without a mate. What do you mean?
He can't have. It says in the Quran. I can't remember if it's this one. It says in the Quran that a god cannot have a son without a mate.
That's it. They use to translate the word mate, consort.
So in other words, God can only have a son if there's a woman. He cannot create a kid on his own.
Which is a bit stupid, really, because in anyone's, this is not some kind of polemics here, or apologetics, but just look at the logic. If I turn around and say that my car is my baby, and many men would say that their car is their baby, they refer it to as, it's not like it is a literal baby. I didn't have sex with the car, got a car pregnant, and the car gave birth to another car. It's a
What you
term of
didn't?
endearment. I mean, some cars I've had, they're just like, wow, car porn. Let's go. The BMW E36 M3 convertible is the best looking car in the world, but I wouldn't want to have sex with it. And I certainly couldn't get it pregnant, and it wouldn't give birth to another car. So these things are terms of endearment. So when the Bible refers to such things, it's using the term of endearment. But Islam, yet again, seems to be curious about this. It keeps getting things monumentally wrong.
Okay, 174, you have proof and a bright light. There you go. 175, those who believe will be rewarded. Once again, I mean, we've only heard this like 50,000 times.
Yeah.
And then 176 is the continuation of the faulty inheritance shares as the third chapter. And that is the end.
Famous
of chapter
inheritance
4.
that's never been answered. A few Muslims have given it a go. A few have shouted loudly and hoped that they've answered it. And it remains irrefutable. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I actually wanted to finish a little bit earlier because there's so much stuff to go through with the slavery. Oh, boy. Okay, any comments, questions?
I mean, you
What
could
is
always
the
run it
chat
for an
doing?
extra
I
week,
haven't been-
right?
Sorry?
I've been having a look. There isn't a lot in the comments at the moment. Just checking the diary. I just want to see what the calendar looks like. I mean, you could run it until the 1st of May, right? Because May the 1st is, so you could run 2 more Fridays, because then you would still have 4 in May anyway. So if you want to run long, and especially with slavery, as you say, there's plenty in there. So you could run another 2 weeks if you needed to.
I've been looking at this and I thought maybe we can just sort of skip a lot because it gets a bit tedious. Because we've looked at the words, we've looked at this. So what I want to do today is look a little bit at Sharia and then take a look at the different forms of slavery and then see what the different opinions are in the hadiths and the way that it is applied, and then see if I can get through to what has happened in the last like 200 years. Because people always say, "Oh, this is freeing of slaves," but they're always pretending as though this was a matter of the first 20 years in the in the 8th century. 20, Muhammad died 30, then 700. Yeah, the first 20, 30 years of the 8th century, correct. That this was then the end of slavery, and that is not so. Because the Islamic slavery continued for like another 600, 700, 800 years, and some even say that there's continued all through for 1,000 years, even until like 50 years ago. So it's a lot. Okay, let's go and take a look at Sharia. Should I share this? I don't know if it makes sense. Let me do this anyway. What the fuck? What the hell?
Yeah, it's always good to share if you can.
Yeah, let me do it like this. Let me do it and then
Yeah, definitely need to make it a lot bigger, even bigger if you can.
But now I've lost it. This is what we did last week. Oh shit! Now it's all the way in the front. Oh god, no, that was not a good idea. This is what we did last week. This is what we did there. These are the things. Here we go. So what I want to do today is look at Sharia for a little bit, because we went through this Mamalakut Aymanukum, that which your right hand possesses. In Sharia, in Islamic law, slaves are possessions and property of a Muslim free man. Now, this is from an Islamic site. Okay, this is not me, this is not a critic, this is not something, this is just somebody who's giving you the facts. So it says slaves could be bought or sold under Islamic law according to the Quran and the Hadiths. And pious exhortations from jurists to free men to address their slaves by such euphemistic terms as my boy and my girl. And this is from Sahih Hadiths, okay? Stem from the belief that God, not their master, was responsible for the... okay, Bukhari. Here you have the reference. Bukhari 346, 728, exactly. And this is what Muhammad said. Don't go and speak about slaves, but refer to them as my boy and my girl. Now, if you refer to somebody my boy or my girl, that is not the word slave. So I'm using the word slave as an umbrella term for all these different forms of slavery, for all these different forms of ownership, for all these different forms of having some sort of control over another human being and making this human being your property. And this is the big difference. Okay, and I'm going to go a little bit later into the different forms. And then the Quran does not explicitly state that a slave is a spiritual equal of a free Muslim, but it does the opposite. If you go, and we've seen these sentences here, and we've seen this of the Quran state at least three distinct and unequal categories of human beings: free Muslim, males, slaves, and women. Okay, so this is the distinction. And there are some sentences which we've already been through, which show these differences, which use the distinction between a man, a woman, and a slave. So if you have a slave who is just another second semi-wife or something, it does not make sense if you use the sentences. So people like Ahmed, what they're doing is they're tinkering with the label slave, and they're saying, well, it doesn't really mean slave; it means semi-wife or people under your oath or things like that. But if you look at the contents behind the label, it's still a slave, because this is exactly what it says in the Quran. And then you have 1671, those who were favored would not hand over their provision to those whom their right hand possess, so that they would be equal to them therein. So there are a lot of sentences which stress the difference between a free person and somebody they own. And you doesn't matter whether you go and you say, well, slave, mamalakut, aimanakum, that doesn't really mean slave. No, it means something else. And what is behind this label, that is what is important for me. So when an individual earns a mission of day, they were to free a slave. And this is exactly the point, as punishment, because you own something. It's like a toaster. So when you do something wrong, you have to give up a piece of your furniture or a piece of something that you own. And this, for example, can be a toaster. And this is the point. And now we're getting to the area which is really sick in my eyes, because regarding the rules for having sexual intercourse with these people that your right hand possesses, a man may not have sexual intercourse with a female slave belonging to his wife, but only the one that he owns. Neither may he have relations with a female slave if she is co-owned. Remember, we mentioned this with slavery, that you can have different people owning one slave, and then she can be passed around. They can have sex with her if they get the confirmation and the permission of the other owners. Here it says with the females that are co-owned without the permission of the other owners. We had this last week, and this is something that I don't know, a lot of non-Muslims or a lot of even Muslims are not aware of, that the slave was a real commodity. It's like different people own a toaster, and you can take turns in making toast in that toaster. So if you can't afford your own toaster, you own a portion. It's like sharing ownership, like timeshare of a toaster or of a slave. And then it continues, he may have sex with a female captive who was previously married prior to captivity, provided their iddah, the waiting period, had come to an end. So you have very clear rules regarding slavery, regarding the treatment of slaves. In other words, slavery is not abolished, it is regulated. And this is the big difference. And now
that's huge, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? So if now you have sex with a female slave and then she has a child, again, this is regulated. It is not abolished or something, but it is regulated, because this is an improvement in her status, as she cannot be sold anymore. But, and is legally freed upon the death, now listen to this, I remember this now. The child is born free due to the father, the master, being a free man. And although there is no limit on the number of concubines a master may possess, the general marital laws are to be observed, such as not having sexual relations with the sister of a female slave. But you can have sex with your own daughter because she is the illegitimate child of a slave. And there's a huge problem here. Now, granted, not all madhabs do this. There are madhabs, and I think it's the Hanafi and the Shafi, who say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And the Hanbalis, but it doesn't matter. I mean, there are differences in opinion here. Okay, so there's no this called ulema has no ijma. So there's no consensus within the jurisprudence in the Islamic fiqh that everybody agrees that you are allowed to have sex, but some say yes, you are. So this is, in my eyes, this is quite sick. People are told that if they do not have the means to marry a free woman, they can marry, with the permission of the whatever respective masters, another slave woman who is a Muslim and which was also kept chaste. Okay, so she was not loaned out as a prostitute or something. And in such marriages, they must pay the dowries and blah blah blah. So Sharia authorized the institution of slavery. Now, Sharia, remember, this is Islamic law, which is based on Quran and the Sunnah. So there are different portions of the Sharia taken from from 3 different sources, which is the Quran, which is the Hadith, and which is the Sirah. So it allows the institution of slavery. Muslim men could have sexual relations with slaves without their consent, and it is the religious foundation for enslaving non-Muslim women. And to some extent men only, but we've seen that the men were not so, there were very few men who were being enslaved. It was the other way around in the transatlantic slave trade, but here it was predominantly women. And then the slaves' manumission was authorized and regulated, but it required that the slave first convert to Islam. Now, this was not always practiced, okay, but this is what Sharia said, all right? So in practice, this was not always kept. And then children were Muslims because the father was. This is also another reason why a woman is not allowed to marry a non-Muslim. And a Muslim man is allowed to marry a non-Muslim woman. Because the man, this is the misogyny in here, determines the belief system of the child. So the children are going to be indoctrinated with Islam by the father. The mother can't do that, because the father is the deciding factor here. And that is why the woman can be Christian or whatever. As long as the man is a Muslim, it's okay, because he will indoctrinate the child. If you're a woman, you cannot marry a non-Muslim, because then the non-Muslim will indoctrinate the child with their belief system. That's why it's not allowed. This is the whole reasoning behind this. And then we have some examples in the late 2014 Islamic State of Iraq, this ISIS, and here it's ISIL, so Islamic IS, and then Iraq and Levant, so it's ISIL in this case, released a pamphlet on the treatment of female slaves. Okay, I think we've all heard about this. And it's like a price list. And it shows what kind of women with what hair color, what eye color, and blah, 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 are worth how much money. So this is it's sick. And this is the whole point. It's permissible to have intercourse with a female slave who hasn't reached puberty if she is fit for intercourse. Okay? How do you determine that? We don't know. If she is not fit for intercourse, then it is enough to enjoy her without intercourse. I don't know if you've heard about the concept, the Islamic concept of thighing, which is still to this day propagated in the little green book of Ayatollah Khomeini, where the man is allowed to just rub his erect penis between the thighs of a baby, and then he can enjoy his orgasm without penetration. Now, how sick do you have
Is
to
it a
be
baby?
to enjoy that?
Yes. Yeah, I've read that.
I mean, that's pedophilic type tendencies, isn't it?
Well, it depends on how you define pedophilia, because
Yeah,
pedophilia
that's
can be
true.
defined as just the predominance or the preference, or there's different definitions of pedophilia. That's why I
Mm.
prefer not to call Mohammed a pedophile. It's
That's
just
right.
that he married a 6-year-old girl. Now, would anybody give their 6-year-old girl to a 50-year-old man to marry him? I don't think so.
I think,
So,
yeah, I think when you're looking at paedophilia, you're really looking at a mindset and a pattern of behaviour. This isn't paedophilia because it's done in the open, and it's legislated. So this is your wife as well. This is not fornication. So their interpretation will be this is your wife, so it's lawful in that context. So in that sense,
exactly. Yeah,
you can't call it paedophilia.
that's a good point. That's a good point, actually. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Okay, and then we have several examples here of where Muhammad took slaves. I don't know if you know the story when they had in Khaybar, for example, and this is a very famous. Actually, this is my hadith of the week, so I'm not going to shut up. Okay. So Muhammad took several slaves. He took Rayhana as a slave. He presented 3 women from the conquered, blah, 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 and so on. So there's this. So why would you have sex slaves in the first place? Well, they say it satisfied the sexual desire of the female slaves. Okay? It satisfied the sexual desire of the female slaves. So you were doing them a favor that you were raping them. And because it satisfied the sexual desire of the female slaves, it prevented the spread of immorality in the Muslim community. Can you believe it? So most schools restrict the concubinage to a monogamous relationship, and that's all. Okay, okay. But this is then you have somebody called Clarence Smith, an opposing view, Islam and the abolition of slavery, citing Ghulam Ahmed Pervez. But this sounds like Ghulam, isn't that an Ahmadiyya title? I'm not even sure. And Amir Ali, who argued that the Quran should actually read Ma Malakat Amanukum to be in the past tense. When some demanded that Pakistan should reinstate slavery in 47 upon its independence from the British colonial rule, Pervez argued that the past tense interpretation means the Quran revealed an unqualified ban on slavery because it was in the past tense. And that meant that this was intended for a time long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Yeah. So Malik, the founder of the Malikis, states that if a man rapes a slave girl, he must pay the slave owner the amount by which he diminished the value by raping her. So this is now, this is one of the madhabs, okay? So this is law. This is the legal law being applied today, according to this madhab of the Malikis. So if a man rapes a slave girl, he has to pay the slave owner an amount by which he diminished her value by raping her. So if you damage
How
the
do you do
toaster,
that?
you have to pay for the repair of the toaster.
Yeah, how do you determine that, right?
Well, number one, that, but the fact that it is in there shows you that the people who are coming to us and saying there is no slavery in Islam are being so dishonest. Or maybe they really have no idea what their own books tell them. Maybe they have no clue what Islamic texts, what the scholars are saying about the contents of the Quran. Now, Malik is one of the biggest names in Islamic scholarship. So, okay, if you go then to the Quran and you go to chapter 2, we've actually done this, okay, because it says the freeing of human beings from bondage, it's regulating it, how they need to do it, and then 23, who abstain from sex except for those joined in the marriage of bond. So these are examples from the Quran. So in other words, catch a girl, make her captive, and you are free from any blame if you rape her or gang rape her in the case of joint ownership, or make more women your captives and rape them too, or exchange girls with your mates every half hour or day or week. This is what I call the timeshare. A slave is a slave, and spoils of war you take just and good. This is the expression from the Quran, according to Quran and Islam. We sometimes wonder if this is the reason for so much mass rape sometimes when Muslims wage war in Darfur and Bangladesh were examples to remember. Forget that the women were humans. Take them captive. You're free to rape them without any blame. Really good religion. Well, this was a critic, obviously. And apology, this is what it really says regarding slavery and money. The truly pious is he who spends his substance for the freeing of human beings from bondage. This is exactly what we have here. So this is the complete sentence. And what they're doing is they're quote mining. If you are pious, you spend money to free slaves. But this is my question. This is what I wrote. How many? How much money gets you how many slaves? Why should you do that? Well, if you are pious, you do that. What does that mean? Well, if you spend to free a human being, you get a reward because you are pious. So this is not being, a good Samaritan. There you go.
Yep.
You're not being a good Samaritan. You're not being a person who is caring for the well-being of others. You are looking for a reward. And then what are the consequences of freeing a slave? Well, it's not the humanitarian aspect, is it? But then my question is, why conquer or buy slaves in the first place? Why is it that Muslims come to us and say, well, female captives were left behind. If we don't enslave them, they are lost because there is no man around. And if there is no man around, well, they will perish. So we'll take them in as slaves, we'll feed them and clothe them, and they're going to be grateful that we are doing this because without a man around, they would be totally lost. But then it says you need to free them. So why do you need to take slaves when you need to free them? This does not make sense.
I think, Rob, did you not do a discussion on this a couple of months ago where one of the callers called in and he was saying that they wouldn't be able to find a way home, they'd be lost, they wouldn't be able to fend for themselves. That's why this kind of behavior was tolerated. And you were saying, well, the good thing to do was to make sure that they took them to another village and just left them at the village where they'd feel safe. Do you remember that discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a variety of things you could do, right? If you were really a benevolent conqueror, then, there's a lot better that you can do. And even if you did exactly what you did, but you just didn't own them, right? You took them as prisoners of war, or you took them for safety, but then you allowed them to leave whenever. Anything's better than that. And that's the other thing, right? All we need to do is say, whatever circumstances you're in, nothing is better, nothing is worse than taking them, adding the additional point of ownership, because you can have everything else without owning somebody.
And we have the Geneva Convention. So how come that men, human beings, can be better than a god?
Well, I think they're not.
And then,
really,
well,
are
normally we only stick to what the Quran says, but this is what Muhammad says. The Prophet said the freed slave belongs to the people who freed him. In other words, the individual can free a person or manumit a slave. But then it's still part of the group. So the tribe still keeps the slave. Because remember, I remember the story when I said, if you free a slave and then this slave wants to go home, hang on, the next guy is going to see this slave, this black guy walking around, or black woman, and they're going to immediately enslave her again. That is why you actually had pieces of paper that you could say, listen, I'm a freed slave, I'm allowed to go, so you're not allowed to enslave me. Why would they do that? Anyway, so in Bukhari, then it says slaves are property. They cannot be freed if an owner has outstanding debt, but can be used to pay off the debt. So this shows, again, the callous approach towards people as property.
When you use the word callous approach to, we have to bear in mind that we're talking about a particular ethnicity as well about these slaves. So it's not just the slavery that we're talking about. There's also a mindset of attitude as to what kind of human beings these are to the slave masters. These are not just slaves. There is the most abhorrent racism ever written that would make even the Ku Klux Klan blush, with reference to Islam and the attitude, not just of Muhammad, but the tafsirs themselves are the most disgraceful human beings when it comes to their attitude to black people and the writings that they have and what their opinions were.
It's really
I don't know,
terrible.
is that something that you're going to be mentioning at some point? Because I know we're talking the theme of slavery, but if we're going to start talking and using words callous, it might be a good thing maybe next week, or if the theme's going to continue for the following week, to actually bring out what that word actually, what the context of the word callous is. And that's the
Well, I'm
race.
not going to go into the ethnicity because, well, we all understand that the word the word abd for slave is the same word as for a black guy. Okay, so 99% of slaves that we are talking about were blacks.
Yeah, but it's also the racist verbatim that came out their mouth. So, okay, then if we're not going to touch on it, for anyone that want, maybe look into it, the racism that was involved with this slavery as well.
Well, there is a lot of racism, but I did not make this a topic on its own. No, I touch on this, yes, but I don't make this into an issue. No, because today there is no such thing as you're not allowed to be a Muslim if you are a black guy or something. That doesn't work. Yes, it is true in the old days, in like 1,000 years ago, or even a couple hundred years ago, it was usually black women, but they also had, like I said, slave girls from Ireland and all the way up to Iceland. So this was not based on ethnicity.
They didn't have racist comments like even if your slave, your master happens to be a black man with the head like a raisin.
Yes, there are racist comments, but it's not a basis. The point that I'm making is there was no basis for doing anything based on ethnicity. Okay, here's some examples why this concept of slavery in the Quran shows and demonstrates, and in my eyes is compelling evidence that we're talking about slavery and not just under your oath, under your control, under your whatever what Muslims today are trying to make it. Because in 1675, it says, Allah sets forth a parable of a slave under the dominion of another. He has no power of any sort, and a man on whom we have bestowed goodly favors, or godly favors, I think it's supposed to be, from ourselves. So this is the freeman and the slave, and he spends freely, privately, publicly. Are the two equal? And this is the question, are the two equal? No. Praise be to Allah, but most of them understand not. So this 1675 very clearly says that there is a difference between a free Muslim and a slave. And it says here, the Muslim believer is the master, non-believer the slave without any rights. Then we have 2:178. Freeman for a freeman, slave for a slave, female for a... Remember, this is what we talked about last time. That if you kill a slave of another guy by mistake, you have to go and kill one of your slaves. So why would it mention freeman and a slave if this does not exist? Why would you have the classification of three distinct groups of people? And what I call the most damning of them all, 3350, we have made lawful unto thee thy wives, unto whom thou hast paid their dowries, and those whom thy right hand possesses, the mamalakat aymanukum, of those whom, and this is another thing, Allah has given thee as spoils of war. So if there are spoils of war, there are people who are spoils of war. So this is something that you get at the end of the war. You can keep the people as property. It's a possession. Possesseth. Okay, I think this is Picton. He speaks this antiquated way. So this is how is this unclear? How can you be in? I can't understand how people can come to me and say, look, it says here we have made lawful wives and the others if they are under your oath. Why would you, if you have an employee why would you be allowed to have sex with them? And why would you have an employee whom you didn't hire, but whom you received as war booty, as property? How can you still come to me and say, nope, there's no slavery in Islam. There's no slavery in the Quran. You are wrong. This is just your evil mind where you are trying to get your Islamophobic mind to damage Islam. Somewhere you are making all of this up. How can you come to me and seriously do this when you have a sentence like this one? So this is me again. This is my question. If the Muhammad is like a wife, well, almost, how can this semi-wife be a gift? How can you be allowed to have sex with your wife up to, oh, sorry, this should be 2, up to 4 of them, and your semi-wife without any numerical limitations? Because you can have as many of these right-hand possesseth women as much as you want. So there's no limitation here. And then how can an apologist explain how a semi-wife or non-slave can, oh shit, this was typed in a hurry, can be married but only after the permission by their owner? That doesn't make sense. Whoever among you has not within his power ampleness of means to marry a free believing woman, then he can marry one of those whom your right hand possess from among your believing maidens, and Allah knows best your faith, you are sprung from one of those. So marry them with the permission of their masters. So if these are just employees, why would they need the permission of their masters before they're allowed to marry me?
Well, because they're property, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but people are saying there is no such thing. And let those who cannot find a match keep chaste till Allah give them independence in His grace. And such of your slaves as seek a writing of emancipation, write it for them. If you are aware of aught of good for them, bestow upon the wealth of Allah which He has bestowed upon you. And this is the funny thing. This means that if they convert, then let them go if they really want to and they are able to pay for it or whatever. But now the funny thing is, force not your slave girls to whoredom, in other words, into prostitution, that ye may seek enjoyment of the life in the world. But if you do, then Allah is forgiving and merciful. So what is the point of having this in there, saying, don't let your slave girls go into prostitution so that you get some money from this? So if you have a good-looking slave girl, this is not an investment that you are allowed to just rent out to others and take money. But if you do, it's also okay. So what is the point of saying, no, don't do that? This is so weird.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I get so down if I read these sentences. You know, how can anybody tell me that a God will tell you that you can do these things? This is quite weird. Okay. What I want to do is quickly go through, well, maybe not quickly, spend a little bit of time on different forms of slavery. This is what we know today. So what we see is a lot of people coming and saying, well, this is not really slavery. Well, then what is it? And there you get I get different expressions. So today what we know of, we have forced labor. And this describes all types of coerced work that an individual must provide against his or her will. Contemporary forced laborers are treated as property to be exploited commercially, much in the same way that African Americans were regarded during the underground and so on. So forced labor is the typical slavery that you got in the transatlantic slave trade. So in other words, you get people who are enjoying their life on the savannah or plains of Africa. Somebody comes around, takes them, puts chains on them, puts them on a boat. They have to row all the way over to America, and then they'll have to go and work there, and they're not paid anything. They don't get leave. They don't get holidays. They cannot build their own house. They don't get any of that. It depends on the owner of the slave, because some owners were actually quite good to the people, but most were not, because they didn't have to. So it's like today's capitalism. You are allowed to pay your people much more, but a lot of people prefer not to. That is why we don't have a discussion about maximum wage, but minimum wage. And this is the same concept. So in those days, most people were not good to their slaves, but some were. So this is forced labor. Then you have bonded labor or debt labor. In other words, this is something that we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago when the Romans had this concept. This describes slavery in which an individual is compelled to work in order to repay a debt. It differs from other forms in that oftentimes the laborer and the employer initially enter into a mutual agreement. However, contract conditions may be illegal and are vastly more beneficial to the employer than the laborer. These workers become slaves when they continue working but cannot pay off their initial debt because of exploitative contract terms and thus cannot leave. So I don't know if this is clear. If you cannot pay something, like if you buy a door or something and you cannot pay for the door after a while, then the guy says, well, you can come and work for me as a carpenter. If you've worked for 6 months, then you're good to go, then you've paid it off. Or he then abuses your situation and says, well, 6 months is not enough. Actually, you haven't worked enough, so you need to add another 6 months. And then it becomes like a forced laborer. But I think this is clear. Then you have what you have in the Islamic slave trade, which is sex slavery. Describes women, men or children, in all possibilities, are exploited in the commercial sex industry, which may include pornography, prostitution, erotic entertainment, strip clubs. So this is even happening today. So sex slavery is happening today, where a lot of women, especially for some odd reason, Ukrainian women, are being exported into the Middle East. I don't know why. And I remember some sheikhs when they buy their planes and they go and get the people to serve them on the plane. The women are really, they are selected by bust size. So the bigger the boobs, the more favors you get from the sheikhs who are flying with you. There's actually one girl who, one day had a white Range Rover standing in front of her door because she was providing such a good service on the plane to the guy. So this can happen today, where there are women being, and even today, I know that there are women being brought over from East Germany, from Eastern countries into Germany, who are working as prostitutes. And they will come for 1 year or 2 years, and then they want to go back, and then they don't. A lot of these girls actually stay, and they are being passed on from one brothel to the next because they need new faces or things like that. So money may or may not be exchanged. Other things that may be traded for sex acts are drugs, shelter, food, or clothes. A person's initial consent to participate is irrelevant if that person is held in service through psychological manipulation or physical force. That's really sad. And this is not only in Islam, this is not only in the old days, this is actually happening today, unfortunately. This is what we also see in the grooming gangs in the UK that have come to light. And I wonder how many more there are. Then you had child slavery, describes all child labor obtained from individuals under the age of 18 through the means of forced deception or coercion. Children can be enslaved in debt bondage, forced labor, prostitution, armies, domestic work, other forms of hazardous work. Forced child labor exists in nearly every industry around the globe, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then you have, I think, and this is very common in the Middle East, domestic servitude. And I've seen this, you have the family, you have the guy, you have his 2 or 3 wives, and then you have Filipino girls or Indonesian girls walking behind with the prams and things like that. And describes slaves that are forced to work in extremely hidden workplaces, private homes. Domestic workers become slaves when their employer uses force, fraud, or coercion to control or convince an employee that they have no choice but to continue working. And then isolating environments, unfamiliar languages, confiscated travel documents, restricted mobility are often connected to this form of slavery. So these are the 5 forms of slavery that we know today. And I think the forced labor and the sex slavery are the ones that we see predominantly in Islam today, in the old days for the last 500 years. Some of them even today. Okay, let's quickly go into a definition. Any comments on this?
Yeah, just depressing, isn't it?
It is. It's really terrible, I think. Slave versus servant. Now, this is something that I found, which I found quite compelling. I don't know, you tell me. A servant is a person who voluntarily, willingly, and usually consciously, at least to a degree, enters into servitude or service to another. That's a servant. A slave is a person who involuntarily enters into servitude or service to another. It may occur consciously, as by violence or force of some kind, or unconsciously, as by brainwashing, hypnosis, false beliefs, or some other method of mind control. Does that make sense?
Yep. I think the main thing is ownership, right?
That's the point. But the point that I think here is very important. It may occur consciously or unconsciously, in what we call subconsciously, because I don't like this subconscious, but it's unconsciously. So you can be coerced emotionally to be a slave to someone. Now, you also have slaves who voluntarily enter into this because you get Dominos, for example, advertising their services, and then you can come and be treated like a slave. And a lot of people will come off like I don't know, some sex fetish for them. Now, related words to servant is one in service, an employee, a worker, light worker, warrior, zealot, truth seeker, covenant keeper, blah, 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 blah. But related words to slave are actually quite few. Prisoner, forced worker, captive, dupe, patsy. I've never heard of the word patsy. Hooked, one is controlled or state of bondage. Okay, I only know bondage, forced worker, prisoner, or something. Now, a prisoner, in my eyes, is not a slave. Because a prisoner is somebody who is a prisoner due to an action of what they have done. If they wouldn't have done that, they wouldn't be a prisoner, I think.
Yeah, and prisoners aren't owned, though, anyway. Again, we've got to remember that the ownership is the key word.
So I think this is not correct. I'm talking too much. Okay. Now, back to the Quran. Now we've covered some basic ground. Okay, so we found that what is in the Quran is actually slavery. If we are talking about slavery today, the way that we understand it, we find it in the Quran, albeit in a different way or method or label or a different description. Just like I said in the beginning, if I take my car, I can take it for a ride, for a spin, or you know, whatever. So there are different expressions, but they all refer to the very same thing. So the label might be different, the same as I use the word sunrise. I know it's not a sunrise, but I know what I mean by this, and I know that other people understand if I say this, because it's a term where there's a common understanding, even though technically it's incorrect. So a patsy is a fall guy who takes the blame for somebody else's crime. Oh, thank you. I didn't even know that. I've never heard of patsy.
Yeah, it was a famous thing with Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, and
Oh, that he was a patsy.
people claimed he was a patsy. Yeah.
Okay, now let's go to the next thing. Apologists, what they say. They say it's not really slavery. It's not really this. I don't know how you can. I mean, I think I've made it very clear that you cannot actually run away from this, no matter how much you try and fiddle with the words, how much you try and mess with the labels. What goes on behind the label is still the same thing. Now, what some apologists say that in 1671 there is a misunderstanding, because it says that not those who were favored would hand over their provision, but they are equal, then it is the favor that they reject. Maverick, bullshit, no slavery in Quran. I can refute every single. Yes. You see, this is not audacity. This This is stupidity. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, the corpus is a bit difficult to understand. So Maududi explains that Allah has favored some of you with more worldly provisions than others. Then those who are more favored do not give away their provisions to their slaves, lest they become equal sharers in it. Do they then deny the favors? So this is how Maududi explained this. Now, if anybody like Ahmed, if he thinks Maududi is an idiot, a fool who hasn't studied anything, let Ahmed come along, who doesn't even speak the language, who has no clue what's going on. He says, no, this is not. Maududi says, then those who are more favored do not give away the provisions to their slaves. So Maududi has no clue, doesn't understand the Quran, no idea what it says. Ahmed now, he is the guy. He doesn't speak the language, but he knows exactly what it says. Pickthall, he studied the thing. He knows all this. What does he say? Those are more favorable hand over the provision to those slaves whom their right hands possess, so that they may be equal with them. So in other words, there is a built-in inequality. You cannot go and argue anything else. And then even Sahih International has favored some of you, but those who have favored would not hand over their provision to those whom their right hands possess, so that they would be equal to them. So there is no equality. All right. So now we've established that. Let's go to what Maududi explains in his Tafhim al-Quran. He says it will be worthwhile to give deep thought to the meanings of this verse, for some modern commentators have found strange economic theories in the system in it. Anyway, this is obviously wrong because some people try and put something economical in it. The interpretation is so wrong. This is only about slavery. It is only about equality between, or inequality between owners and slaves. So this is not a sentence which is talking about economic theories, because it mentions handing over provision to somebody. This is not about economic theories. This is about the inequality of the slave owner and the slave. It's about Allah being united to humans, as humans are non-identical to slaves. This is what it's all about. And then he sets forth a parable for your own lives. Do you have among your slaves some who share with you the sustenance that we have bestowed on you, so that you become equals in it, all being alike? Then you would hold them in fear as you fear each other. Thus do we apply. Same thing again. Allah has refuted this kind of shirk. The argument is, when you do not make your own slaves partners, how do you believe that Allah will make his creatures partners? Okay, so you cannot be a God. You cannot be close to your God. You cannot be equal to a God. So the slaves cannot be equal to you. So the same way as the slaves cannot be equal to you, you cannot be equal to God. This is the message here. And I don't care what somebody says. This is the way that it is said, and this is the way that it is understood. I don't know why people fiddle with the words until something else comes out of it. And you can't, because then it doesn't match the rest of the Quran. Because the way that the Quran is talking about slaves is as though they are toasters.
Yeah, but obviously they want to see it as being a moral book, right? So you have to come up with some, let's just say, alternative interpretations, right?
Yeah, but that's all determined by where you live as well. You have to bear in mind that you only hear these arguments when the Muslim is talking to a Westerner or a kuffar in the land of the kuffar. If you're living in the land where Islam has sway of control, you're not going to hear those kind of excuses.
And I don't know if do you know who Sean Spicer is?
Isn't he in the US? He's a
he used to be the spokesperson, the press secretary for Trump. And when Trump said something and was called out, Sean Spicer went out there and he said, well, no, it is not untrue. He was just delivering alternative facts. So alternative facts is the same as lying. It's
what other
saying
people
something
say, right?
different.
I'm delivering my truth. You have your truth. I have my truth. As if there's truth. Exactly. Person can own their own version of truth, right?
It's just an alternative. Oh boy, this is amazing. Anyway, so these are some very common apologist things where they say this and this and this. Now let's go a little bit into the origins. Oh fuck! It's already the end. Can't believe how quickly, because there's so much. I don't know if you can see on the side here where we are in my text. So you can see here that it's page 15 of 75 pages. But I don't know if we can get through. Maybe this is too much detail. Okay, maybe we should. Now, so my question is, how did slaves get into Arabia, and how was Islam, and by extension Muslims, how were they involved? Okay, now, and this is what he in 2002, the Canadian historian Paul Lovejoy wrote about this in his research paper titled "Islam, Slavery, and Political Transformation in West Africa: Constraints on the Transatlantic Slave Trade." So he goes and takes the transatlantic slave trade, which existed at the time, but it wasn't so long and it wasn't so much, and then shows how the slavery, the Islamic slavery, moved into West Africa and actually constrained the transatlantic slave trade because they were taking too many slaves out of West Africa so that there was less left for the transatlantic slave trade. And this is in a collection which is Vieux Problème, Nouvelle Perspective, a French publication because it's Canadian, it's both. So this article examines the relative importance of Muslim merchants in the slave trade of West Africa, including both the transatlantic world and the trans-Saharan Islamic heartlands. It is argued that Muslim involvement in the slave trade limited the development of the Atlantic economy and reinforced an Islamic world that remained largely autonomous. That is, Muslim commercial activity actually constrained the export of slaves across the Atlantic. The Islamic factor, and particularly the political transformations associated with jihad, explains the comparatively low levels of exports to the Americas from Muslim areas, or areas where Muslim merchants were present. Fewer slaves came from areas of Muslim dominance and influence that might otherwise have been expected, since slavery was widespread in these areas, constituting a mode of production that integrated enslavement, slave trade, and slave use on a large scale. So this is a historian, okay? This is not somebody who's giving you the Christian view or the whatever. This is just a historian. He's just stating the facts. And this is what actually happened in reality. So you can't come and argue, no, there was no Muslim ever involved in slavery because it is totally un-Islamic. No, it is not. And then he points out the prices where female slaves exported from Africa were higher when shipped to Islamic regions, and male slaves were higher priced when used in the Americas. He quotes a colleague, Patrick Manning, who writes about the huge losses by Muslim slave traders. There were heavy costs as every stage of the enslavement process, from the actual act of enslavement itself, and this is now something that I want to go into just now, the actual act of enslavement, through the perils of being traded and traveling great distances to the exploitation in the types of jobs slaves had to perform. And he points out that Muslim slave merchants, the promotion of enslavement in an atmosphere already politicized in terms of belief and unbelief, and the justification for enslavement on the basis of Islam. Hence, it becomes important to identify when and where Muslim merchants were operating in West Africa and what role they played in the export trade in slaves. And this is the point that... And the funny thing is, this is still today, it's a taboo. A lot of Muslims will block any kind of publication that mentions the Islamic slave trade. So it's actually quite difficult to publish something like this.
And I'll also add on that a lot of academia do not want to speak about this either. They themselves, in their own education locations, universities and colleges, they don't want to touch on this subject either. And you would think that for something that has lasted for so long and has so much history behind it, why is it that the Atlantic slave trade gets more exposure, that has done significantly less damage in the slave trade in comparison to the Muslim slave trade. You have to ask questions as to why academia is reluctant to say anything on this subject. And if you do, they tend to shun. They're on the side of the Muslim in trying to silence the criticism of the slave trade.
Yeah, it's been very effective, right? Isn't it? This sort of propaganda about you causing hate speech and division, and look what is happening. I had a lady that sort of tried that technique on one of the other streams I was on, myself and James SC, etc. More so James SC apparently, but myself as well, and like yourselves, we're causing all this division and hate, and that's the real problem. It's okay to critique Islam, quote unquote, in some vague, nondescript way, but the way we do it creates this hate and division, and potentially is going to get people killed, and it's just awful.
Yeah, but why is it that Christians can say, yes, we did, and it was wrong? We see the mistake, we see the error, and we go and we admit this, and we say, yes, it was wrong. That's it. So why is that possible for those people to say that? And why is it possible for others, like for the Germans? Why is it possible for the Germans to say, yes, we had concentration camps, and yes, it was bloody well wrong? They admit this, and they will stand by it, and they will accept the responsibility and say, yes, we did, and we hate ourselves for it. It's something that happened. We don't know really what happened, blah, blah, blah. But they admit this. Why can't Muslims be honest?
Because there's no death sentence or punishment of death or ostracism if you challenge Christianity or Judaism or Christendom rather, or Nazism or communist China, or even the Soviet Union with the gulags and Siberia and such. There's no punishment or death sentence when you criticize those ideologies or those moments in history, whereas Islam, the threat is very real. It seems not just in this area, but predominantly it seems to come to fore with Islam that telling the truth has now become a hate speech. Stating facts is now a crime, and that's what we're living in. And it seems that Islam has spearheaded this kind of dialogue and travesty of free speech, free expression, and highlighting historical facts.
This could be a factor. I was just sorry. I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at this. I mean, this is crazy. This whole show is white supremacy. White supremacy? Because you don't have objective morality. I mean, this guy is cuckoo.
How can it be white supremacy if I'm half Persian?
Well,
yeah, no, I think we can dismiss silly claims like that. I mean, we just move on. One can see that just as noise. It's like typing gibberish, and we just move on from silly claims like that.
But it's amazing that people will do this.
Well, I mean, again, that it has currency, right?
Yeah,
if you
go?
I think if you shout white supremacy or Atlantic slave trade, that is currency today, right? If you say Arabic slave trade or Islamic slave trade, right? That's a taboo thing, as you guys have pointed out, right? Because, hey, it's a minority and you might cause division and hate, but it's okay to do it the other way around because 200 years ago that they were all bad people. So let's continue with that, right? Let's try the guilt trip. It won't work with some of us, but presumably those people who are so desperate to I guess, free themselves from what their ancestors did will do anything really to try and make amends, and they never can. That's the problem. You can never appease these people. So, we can all agree that it was wrong at that stage, etc., but I'm not responsible for my 10th generation's past, just like anybody else who's not responsible for theirs, right? So at some point you say, okay, we move on, and you're given equality, you're given freedoms, etc. in this country, and what are you using them for? You can go back and challenge everything if you want, but at some point we're just going to get bored with this and move on. So
yeah, and
then just a lot
if
of
you
noise,
take what
really.
Thunder just said, if I look at now the reaction, it shows the desperation that these people are displaying here, because they don't have arguments, they can't do anything else. So that's all they have.
But I think, as I say as well, Stops, the biggest confusion I see with Muslims is this thing with objective and subjective. They just repeat these words because it's a mantra to them. They don't really understand. If I had to challenge Maverick on this, he would just crumble, right? It'd be just quicksand. He wouldn't even realize it, right? He'd shout loudly and attempt to try and defend it. And the chasm would just open beneath his feet and he'd sink, and you'd hear the echo, and he'd still be under the delusion that he's on the top, standing on granite, right? Especially with this objective subjective thing, it's just confusing. And rather just compare different moral systems, and that's better for the lay person. Unless you're a philosopher or somebody that's taken a little bit of time to read this, you're just going to confuse yourself and everybody else.
It's the same with Imran Hussein. When I talk to him about, when he comes up with the scientific problem of induction, he doesn't understand what it means. He doesn't understand what inductive and deductive is, but he still calls it a problem. But he doesn't understand it.
That's because they've taken on arguments that they don't understand. They plagiarize them, they cut and paste them, they copy them, they repeat them without understanding the subject. I mean, I was on Adnan Rashid's channel 2 nights ago, and I posted a comment. And funnily enough, one of the responses from the Muslims was, you challenge Islam, but you're a Christian. And I don't know how he concluded I was a Christian, because I never made any comments about my identity. And then starts talking about the pornography in the Bible. And my first instinct was, how can a Muslim complain about pornography in the Bible, considering what his own text says? Really, you're talking about swelling breasts, perpetual virgins, forever erections, 72 virgins, sex all night.
That's not in the Quran.
No, but it's Islam, and I don't separate the Quran from the Hadith. To me, they're the same things from the same pot. I don't make the distinction. So, and I just found it unbelievable. And then I thought to myself, well, then that's exactly what I'd expect from a Muslim who's merely repeating something that Didat said in 1978 without understanding the actual arguments. So this kind of stops. I remember you commenting once where Hamza Sources was basically, was it you that did the video? He copied every argument that William Lane Craig had made and basically repeated the words without understanding the words.
Yeah, I put 3 guys next to each other.
I'm sure you did it several years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, and one was William Lane Craig, one was Hamza Sources, and he basically word for word repeated him. Yes. Without understanding the
including
argument,
the hand gestures.
That's right. I didn't know. Yeah, absolutely. There you go. I was a fanboy of you back then. You see.
Probably the most ironic statement we've seen on the show.
There's not a single line in the Quran you could say anything negative about.
So clearly, negative means something completely different in this person's worldview.
Well, I think it's the other way around.
Well, actually, that's the point. Could you say there's nothing negative in the Quran? I ask you, can you provide something that's positive in the Quran?
There's very little.
I think let's take that to Discord. So if anybody wants to join us on Discord, because it's coming up to the end of the show, then we'll move over Discord. I'll pop the link in so that people can directly click on it. There it is. It's coming into the chat there now. And as a reminder, we'll pop it up there as well. So by all means, come and defend the claim. There's not a single negative thing. We have to understand what negative means, because negative in his world might mean positive. So we've got to make sure that we're not confused.
It's subjective.
The Quran is the truth. Now, Maverick, I don't know if you're just stupid or you just really you have no clue what you're talking about.
Let's do it on Discord so we stop. So otherwise we just get
but we are now on comments. Here. We're now on user comments at the end.
Gotcha.
Because I've still got another 2 minutes before I go for the hadith of the week.
Cool.
You cannot have a sentence like, my bicycle is the truth. It doesn't work. A bicycle is an object. A book is an object. The Quran is an object. It cannot be the truth. The truth can only be a statement or something that you are talking about. An object can never be the truth or can never be true. You can have a true claim, you can have a true whatever, but not an object. So, number one, that is stupid. So it's nonsensical to say that the Quran is true or that Islam is true or that something. Only the claims within the ideology. That is the only thing that can be true. So you saying that the Quran is true, is the truth, is stupid. Give one statement. Now I issued that in 2012, and nobody's come up with it. Nobody has come up with a single statement in the Quran that is correct. There's a lot of claims, but none has actually demonstrated it. So the Quran is not an argument. The Quran is a set of ideas. It's a collection of ideas. It's a collection of claims. There is nothing in the Quran that is factually correct. All it does is it make claims. If you do this, then this happens. If you do what I want you to do, then you'll get a reward. When are you going to get a reward? Well, when you're dead. So what is the point of having that? Okay, are there any other comments on slavery? What is this one? The 5 pillars? Out of context, rhetorical devices, read the original Arabic, Islamophobic, racist. That's a good one. I like that. All right. So what we've done today is we've shown that slavery is part and parcel of Islam. Fiddling with the labels, fiddling with individual sentences does not help, because the entire Quran is built around the concept of slavery. It is in Islam and you cannot get it out. Now, it is very good that Muslims are showing that they are better than their God, but they can't. Okay, that brings us to the hadith of the week, which I gave away actually. It's from Sahih Bukhari, volume 1, hadith 367. We conquered Khaybar, took the captives, and the booty was collected. And Dia came out and said, "Oh, Allah's Prophet, give me a slave girl from the captives." And the Prophet said, "Go and take any slave girl." And he took Safiya bint Huyay. A man came to the Prophet and said, "O Allah's Apostle, you gave Safiya bint Huyay to Dia, and she is the chief mistress of the tribes of the Qurayza and Nadir, and she befits none but you." So the Prophet said, "Bring him along with her." So Dia came with her, and when the Prophet saw her, he said to Dia, "Take any slave girl other than her from the captives." Now, it goes on a bit. It's a bit longer because he has sex with her. And there are varying forms here. Where first some say, well, he first married her. Others say, no, he didn't. So we don't really know. With that, closing remarks.
Yep. Join us on Discord. I think that will be the thing. I'll post it again. So if you want to come and have a discussion and tell us how there's not a single problem, then by all means do so. And if you want to come along and just be a spectator, you can do that too. There's the link that should take you directly to the Discord server, which is the after show voice chat. The after show voice chat.
Thunder, closing comment?
No, thank you everybody for listening to the show tonight. I've been reading the comments on the side. It's good to see that people are participating in the discussion. So, and I thank the panelists as well. It's been a nice show to be a part of this evening.
And would everybody have enjoyed if we had forced Ahmed to come on the show? Or would that have been much the same of what we've already heard, so it wouldn't have really gone and changed anything?
I think that's best to do that on Discord.
I'd have encouraged it to be on the show because it gives an opportunity for the non-Muslims to listen how Muslims speak. I mean, I noticed that we've got some people from Malaysia and other places far away listening to the show. So it would have been good for them if this is their first experience of the show, or they've only tuned in recently to listen how actually Muslims reason their points. So I think
it's a good point. Yeah.
you know, see how we discuss things with them and how Muslims discuss things with us.
Thank you, boys and girls. See you next week. And if anybody is interested, we're going to go to Discord now. And by the way, this is not recorded. Okay, so anybody can voice their opinion on Discord. This is not going to go out anywhere. So if you feel a bit shy to do this here on the show, you're welcome to join us on Discord. Just click on the link and it takes you straight there. And it's the after show voice. See you there. See you next week. Cheers.
Good night.
Goodbye, everybody.